my name is Andreas Bueckle. I'm the research lead in the Cyber Infrastructure for Network Science Center here at the Department of Intelligent Systems Engineering at Indiana University. I am excited today to talk to you about how we can build the Human Reference Atlas in virtual reality. A little bit of background about me. My bachelor's degree was in media production with a focus on video journalism. I spent the majority of my undergraduate time with a camera in hand, oftentimes in TV studios. My master's was in communication in economic contexts, which was really a lot of advertising work, planning campaigns, a very healthy mix of information science, tech, and also humanities. And then for my PhD, I came to Indiana University on a scholarship initially from the German Academic Exchange Service to do research on data visualization. And then at some point, my PhD advisor at the time, Kadi Bornel, organized a demonstration of Unity 3D, which is a video game engine to produce augmented reality content. And I was hooked the second the presentation ended. I would like to show for a couple of minutes Unity and why this work is so engaging to me. And then I will talk a little bit more about the organ gallery and about the work that we do with the HRA. My talk is going to be about virtual reality, and not everybody might be on the same level when it comes to discussing that type of terminology and the kind of technology. So I prepared a little introduction material just for kind of the technology and the jargon that comes with it. My research is on interactive data visualization and virtual reality, and so it stands to reason that this technology is very important for us. So in the 1990s, Milgram and Kishino published a really influential paper describing the so-called reality and virtuality continuum, and they proposed a spectrum to describe all of the different technology points that that you can do between reality and virtuality. So you can see a visualization of this down here. On the left side and the bottom, we are in a completely real environment. So this is from the paper, these images I added. On the left side, we can see, this is just somebody out there in nature. There's no technology at all. This is a real physical environment. On the other side of the spectrum, we are in an entirely virtual environment. This is, of course, from the excellent video game Half-Life Alyx, where the entire world is modeled. There is nothing physical in here. The user is completely enclosed. Okay. And then in the middle, we have this gigantic spectrum of mixed reality. Of course, the term mixed reality has taken on a different meaning by now, but broadly speaking, it is where virtual and real or physical content are mixed. On the left side, we have what's called augmented reality, and this is a term that survived pretty well, where the majority of the content that you see in your application, such as, for example, here in Pokemon Go, is physical. So we can see the users holding a smartphone here. In the background, we can see a yard, and then there is a little bit of virtual content. In this case, this is a Pokemon that you can then catch. And it is, in fact, the charm of augmented reality applications that the majority of what you see in your application is physical and only a small bit is virtual. Then we have a thing called augmented virtuality. This is one of those things that has not survived, but augmented virtuality in the 90s described environments, most often video games, that had very crudely modeled three-dimensional environments, and then because it was very hard to animate human characters, it had video recorded human characters. So you had these humans walking around in these physical spaces, seemingly. And obviously, this kind of art form, it didn't really survive. But nowadays, if you watch many big blockbuster Hollywood movies, that's essentially what it is. It is mostly, oftentimes, just mostly virtual content where an actor has been placed in via a green screen. We, of course, don't call that augmented virtuality anymore, though. And then finally, on the right side here, we have this entirely modeled, like entirely 3D modeled virtual space. Milgram and Kishino described that that the continuum is modeled along three major axes. One is the extent of world knowledge, the extent of presence metaphor, and the reproduction fidelity. The extent of world knowledge, I think, is the most relevant one still, because it describes how much we actually know about the world being shown. So on the left side, that is the puppy picture here, the world is entirely unmodeled. We have no computational model about the entire environment. On the right side, on the other end here in Half-Life Alyx, the entire world is modeled. The world is completely modeled. So every wall, every bit of light, every character, every physical interaction. We have a log of all of that. We can manipulate all of it. All of it follows the rules that we set forth. And then, of course, in the middle, in the really interesting mixed reality space, we have a mix of the two. For example, here in this case, we have a fully realized model of the Pokemon. We can describe how it looks, we can change how it behaves, we can change the sounds, etc. But we cannot change the physical environment. But we still need a representation of it in our application. So normally this is done by by depth cameras or LiDAR or whatever other technology can be used for these AR applications. That gives us a partial model of the environment, not a full model, just a partial model of it. So what I mean by virtual reality here in this talk is this thing here. This is a virtual reality, an HMD, a head-mounted device. You might be familiar with this. Maybe I've even shown you this before at one of the meetings that we might have run into each other. A virtual reality headset, portable, with two virtual reality controllers. So recently there has been a rise of consumer-grade virtual reality, as shown by the many options that are on the market now that are affordable. This here is a Meta Quest 3. This is a consumer grade hardware. It costs around $500. And the very nice thing about this is it can be carried and taken pretty much anywhere it fits into your carry-on luggage. And it has really changed how we can do research with this kind of technology. Not only how we can deploy it, but also how we can develop for it, because we can now use video game engines to create 3D content for it and author 3D content for it. For many applications, you don't even have to have any programming knowledge. You just need the design knowledge to use the game engine to make that initial version of the content. So there are many options today in terms of price, resolution, field of view, size, and tracking. And of course, the technology is growing so fast that these options are getting better and better, faster and faster. There are two broad kind of paradigms for VR, or at least for head device based VR. One is tethered VR, the other one is standalone VR. Tethered VR is what you can see here. This is an HTC Vive. This is from a device that was published in 2015, 2016. This is the headset, and then the headset has to be plugged into what's called a link box, and the link box gets connected to a computer, and then to the graphics card via HDMI, and then via USB to get the keyboard commands and everything, and into the wall power also. The Oculus Quest on the other side, or the Meta Quest as it's called now, works differently. It has so-called inside-out tracking. It has a series of cameras mounted on the outside. You can see those here. And those cameras serve two functions. One, they allow the headset to track itself and also the controllers. So you don't need a complicated setup with a laptop or computer in the background and this link box to run it, or these tracking stations. It can track itself. And the other neat thing is, and that is, I think that is the treasure trove now, is that you can create a high resolution, colored, and also high frame rate video feed of your environment. So if you put this on, it's really hard to describe here on Zoom, but you see your environment, which is obviously a video feed of your environment. But suddenly you have the ability, if we go back here real quick, suddenly you have the ability to model the outside world in a video feed, and then you can start overlaying content. So the Meta Quest 3 and other headsets like it cover a wide array of the spectrum. They can close off the entire world and show you just virtual content, but it can also take the outside world, pipe it in, and then overlay content on top of that. So this device can do multiple things. It can work in many places along the spectrum, which is marvelous. Another really cool thing about virtual reality and its peripherals are the input devices. So on the left side here, we have a classical computer mouse. We have a left mouse button, a right mouse button, and then a middle mouse button or a wheel. So that's 3 buttons. And then we have an X and a Y position because we move the mouse around. Now, the mouse was invented in the 1960s by Douglas Engelbart, who put together the mother of all demos. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's a fantastic recording from, I think, 1968, where he presented the first, what we would today call a personal computer. So he sits at this demo station with a keyboard and a mouse. He had to invent the mouse to put this demonstration together. And then he edits what I think is a shopping list together with his assistant who sits at another machine. They're basically demonstrating how Google Docs works, 20 years before the World Wide Web was invented. This is how old the mouse is, okay? And there's a reason why we still use it, because it is a fantastic input device. But it is also limited. It only has a small selection of buttons, and it only has a two-dimensional position. Now compare that with a virtual reality controller. For a virtual reality controller, well, first and foremost, you have two of them, not just one. So you have two hands, two controllers. And then we have a series of buttons that you can press. We also have these joysticks that you can use, just like you would on a video game controller, for example. Suddenly that gives you the ability to make polar or circular input. And then we also have these trigger buttons here that allow you to give a kind of like gradual input. So a button is either pressed or not pressed. These triggers here can be mapped so that you can give more gradual input. And then, and this is, I think, the really cool part also, a mouse can be moved along 2 dimensions on a mouse pad or on a table. A VR controller has what's called 6 degrees of freedom. So I can move it into 3 different directions, but I can also rotate it around 3 different axes. So I get 6 degrees of freedom suddenly that I can use with my hands now. So the input devices. So trying to tie that, how that fits in with SenNet. There is this vision for using immersive technology such as VR and AR for medical purposes, for healthcare, for example, for bioinformatics. What you see here is what I assume is a stock image from this news article here that illustrates one potential usage of this technology. You can see here, these are 2 people, presumably surgeons or nurses, in an operating room, looking at a 3D model of a brain. Presumably this is very futuristic because they don't have any kind of headset on. This is just kind of projected in space like a hologram, which does not exist yet in this form. And then presumably this is an organ model that represents the brain of a patient that they're about to work on, but they don't really have. I mean, we don't really see how this ties to any particular individual. There's no data overlay either. It looks really cool. It illustrates the idea, but we are not really there yet. So the reality is VR and AR currently are used mostly for learning anatomy and physiology because it's a natural use for the technology. Anatomy and physiology inherently happen in 3-dimensional space because our body is 3-dimensional, and 2-dimensional illustrations only get you so far. And not only is it 3-dimensional, it's also layered in all different directions. So you can, for example, see here, this is an application that lets you take apart the muscular system on a body. Here on the right side, we see a body that has more layers. So we have a muscular layer, we have a vascular layer, presumably also a nerve layer somewhere. We are in this kind of, I might say it's pretty sad looking dark environment here. These models vary in detail also. They can go from photorealistic. No, this is not photorealistic, but it's a little more realistic than this. And then some of these models are more lower level of detail, i.e. more for illustrative purposes. But as far as we know, none of the existing applications display any kind of patient data because, for learning anatomy and physiology, you're normally not very interested in concrete data from individual people. You're interested in general reference anatomy. So this brings me to this concept of the information-rich virtual environment, which was coined by Doug Bauman in this 2003 paper. Again, 20 years old, this paper. An information-rich virtual environment is a realistic environment or virtual environment that is enhanced with the addition of related abstract information. So what you can see here is a 3D model of a human throat. And you can see here, this is the palatine tonsil. And then you can see that we have these kind of little text overlays that give you flat information. So the space here is 3-dimensional because this is, again, a human throat. But then this information here is inherently 2-dimensional. It's just a number. So I assume this is the surface of the right palatine tonsil, which is 295 square centimeters. And then on the right side, similarly, we have all of these geometric primitives, including this rhombus here. And then they are all annotated with these little bits of data, like, for example, how many info panels. I have no idea what that means, but it's also not relevant. The idea here is that you can bring together 2-dimensional data with 3-dimensional data in this kind of virtual environment. And as I mentioned earlier, this is from 2003, so naturally, the way we present graphics and render them has changed significantly since then. So this brings me to the application I would actually like to talk about here, and that is the Human Reference Atlas Organ Gallery in VR. And I assume that most of the folks in SenNet for sure are familiar with what the Human Reference Atlas is. It is a comprehensive and three-dimensional atlas of all the cells in the healthy adult human body, and SenNet is one of the efforts funding the construction of the HRA. It is, of course, compiled by an international team of experts, to which we all belong, who develop these standard terminologies that then link to 3D reference objects. You can see some of these 3D reference objects here on the right side in a second. You can actually see here the exploration user interface where a user can zoom into 3D organs. This is the SenNet branded version, by the way. And then they can click this info panel here on the right, and then they get taken straight to the SenNet portal entry for this particular tissue block here. So we have been developing this application, then we were thinking, well, what if? What if instead of viewing this application on this 2D screen, what if instead we could stand right next to these organs? They have been modeled in human scale after all, because the organs have been modeled based on human reference data, the visible human, male and female. So that seemed like a natural research direction to go into. And this is what the current status of the organ gallery looks like. I will demonstrate that live here in just a second. We are inside of a big anatomical theater, which some of you might be familiar with. It is a way for anatomy students to view surgery being performed or dissection being performed. And then the user is actually sitting in front of this keyboard panel here, which we will have a look at in a second in detail. And then we have our two humans standing here. And then prominently here in the back, we have glowing logos for all of the efforts that are funding the HRA construction and then the organ gallery by extension. So with that said, I'm gonna go out of my slides here, and then I'm gonna go over into Unity. Here we go. So now we are inside of Unity. So again, this is Unity. This is a video game engine that we use to create the Human Reference Atlas organ gallery. You can see here that we are using what's called a device simulator. So I am not currently wearing my VR headset for obvious reasons, but I still have to be able to move through the scene somehow. So we are using this utility here that allows me to act as if I was in VR and walking around and moving my hand, my right hand and my left hand, all while using my keyboard and mouse here right in front of me. So let's walk a bit closer here. Here are our two humans. You can see that this is a development version. There are many kinks that we have to iron out, but these are the same two humans that you would see in the exploration user interface. You can also see, if we go a bit closer, that we have some organs visible in here. These VR devices are limited in terms of the performance that they can handle. So we have to be cognizant about how many organs we show. We have 65 total. We're currently, I think, showing 10 or so in here. Otherwise, the frame rate would drop and it just wouldn't be a very pleasant experience to use anymore. So then if we go back here, the user, this is designed to be used while sitting. So the user sits in front of this panel. And in this panel here, the user can then choose an organ to inspect in more detail. So we can see on the left, we have this light box, which is currently empty. But now I'm gonna, with my right hand, I touch the heart button, which then turns green. And again, normally, you know, in VR, you would actually like use your hand like your controller and then tap the button. And then you can see that the heart is now here with all of its tissue blocks. This is where we currently are. We have a long list of GitHub issues that are ready to go. It's just a matter of finding time to do them. We have spoken with dozens of PIs and key personnel across HubMap and SenNet and other efforts to get where we are right now, to identify this as an environment that is actually comfortable to use. And as you can imagine, VR requires an intense amount of testing because you know, the distances have to work. The whole flow has to work, and this has to be tried out in VR. You can't just do this on a two-dimensional screen. All right. So we recently held a hackathon that was funded by a HubMap Jumpstart Award, where I mentioned earlier that we have performance challenges with these hardware sets. If you have used VR before and you have played video games in there, you will notice just how much worse the graphical quality is compared to if you run the same thing on a PlayStation 5, say, or a high-end gaming PC. But we were able to increase the mean frames per second from 30 to 65. The target is 72. That's also the max that the Meta Quest 2 can handle. The Quest 3 can handle more. But you have to imagine, if you sit in a movie theater and you watch a movie there, it is normally displayed at 24 frames per second, and that is okay for a cinematic look. If you are in VR, most people get motion sick at a frame rate that is that low. So if you have an average frame rate of 30, you increase the chance of people not being able to use your application because they get sick from it. So we were able to increase the frame rate quite significantly. We were also able to reduce the number of triangles, that's polygons, in the scene that have to be rendered by the headset from 4.2 million to about 930K. Meta indicates as a target 1 million for the Meta Quest 2, probably a bit higher for the Meta Quest 3. We also improved the usability of the keyboard, which you were seeing earlier in the demo, and then we added the slide box for better screenshots, in this case of the heart, for example. All right. This is just a little shout out to all of the great folks that helped us put this workshop together. And there's also a website down here that you're welcome to check out. Here are some images. This was a VR developer's dream, being in this kind of environment. This is at the BioVis lab of the BCBB. That's the biocomputational. Make sure I get this right. The Bioinformatics and Computational Biosciences branch at NIAID in Rockville, Maryland. You can see a pretty nice little group. We had some experts invited that we asked to provide us expert feedback into the current version of the organ gallery. And then, of course, all of the VR hardware you could dream of. We have identified a series of use cases in interviews with experts across efforts, mostly HapMap at this point. And we identified 3 use cases that we would like to pursue. One is quality assurance and quality control, giving people the ability to see the data that they registered and verifying that it is in fact in the right organ, that the size is correct, etc. The second one is onboarding to the HRA through an immersive lens. And this third use case here, this needs a little more specking out, but it's the ability to tell embodied data stories, especially as the HRA grows, for example, about the difference between healthy and diseased samples, indicating how healthy reference cell populations look like, but doing that in a way that is storytelling based. And the fact that we are using a video game engine to create this content, this makes it very conducive to telling these kinds of stories. All right. To finish this up, I would like to come back to what I said in the beginning. I was talking about these IRVEs, the information rich virtual environments. Here on the left side, we have what Baumann presented in 2003, the tonsils. Now, 20 years later, in 2023, we are able to actually show the tonsils. So you can see these are the tonsil models that we have in the HRA. And this is 20 years later where we actually got to. So now we have these tonsil models here that are, by the way, semantically annotated with linked open data that are also served as part of the HRA APIs. Likewise, on the right, Baumann was talking about these semantic objects like 3D primitives that would be in space, but that could be tagged with data. And we have that now. So here on the right side, you can see this is the male left kidney that is full of tissue block registrations that are also annotated with data such as with donor metadata and with entity IDs that can then be looked up via the LOD system that we have and via the entity API to get more metadata about it, like who registered it, more information about the donor, more information about the assay types, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, 20 years after Baumann published this paper, which I consider pivotal for my own dissertation, we are now at the point where we actually have built a system like this into the HRA. All right, I want to give out some acknowledgements. This is especially for the hackathon that we did that really propelled the organ gallery forward. I want to acknowledge my excellent team of students, collaborators, and of course my PI, Kadi Bono. Here are some references. And then since I was asked to also speak to junior investigators, we have a junior investigator Atlas Builders meeting coming up that is also that SenNet is also part of. It's going to be in Rockville, Maryland, at the Executive Boulevard. hosted by the NIH, and it has junior investigators and NIH personnel from a variety of common fund efforts. And it is geared towards junior investigators. So those are graduate students, postdocs, staff scientists, or early career faculty that are all invited to attend. And the registration website will go online very, very soon. So if you want to get involved with our research on virtual reality, data visualization, and the Human Reference Atlas, there's a multitude of ways to do that. Broadly speaking, I would say there are 4. The first one is if we run into each other at a conference, at a meeting. Again, I will most likely have my VR headset on me. I would love to give you a demonstration and get your input from you live there. The second one is we are always on the lookout for performing expert interviews with people with a variety of expertises, whether that is handling patient data, whether that is data analysis, or whether you're a data contributor or a PI or a key personnel in the lab. We would love to get your input. This technology is for everyone, and everybody's input is valuable. The third option is if you happen to have a virtual reality headset or have access to one through your lab, for example, or through a family member, or if you own one, let me know. We are using the MetaQuest developer infrastructure to quickly deploy new builds to headsets via the web, and we would be happy to add you to one of our testing channels for your input. And then finally, we are participating in internship programs currently through HubMap, where people can, it's for people with from historically marginalized backgrounds who can then apply for internships. I had a fantastic intern with me this past summer who did research and development of the organ gallery with me, and I would love to continue this kind of work. So there are many ways to get involved with this, and I like to think that they're all pretty fun. If you want to learn more about my work and the work of our team, please feel free to visit my website. Also, always feel free to send me an email. Happy to get in touch, and talk to you soon.